So, Scott, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
You're asking about suttas, and hang on for a little bit, and we'll talk about which suttas by the numbers, etc., are and name would be valuable. But before we do that, it's important to note that the way that the sutras are translated into English is problematic. I think that you've heard me talk about that.
Right.
And the problem comes basically from people who have only one of three skills that are needed. And that is that they have the skill of their own native language, but they don't have the skill of Pali. That in fact, that was the only first reason to translate out of the Pali into English, was because nobody knew what the sutras were saying. And that the problem also was is that the original scholars, um, they used their knowledge of Indo-European language and things like that, that they did not, let us say, readily and fully uh, go for a literature list of all of the suttas that had already been translated into languages that were still alive. In other words, they did not use Sinhalese. They did not use the Burmese. They did not use the Thai. They did not use the Vietnamese. They used a little of the Chinese, but only a little bit. That mostly it was using Sanskrit and what they could get. And so they did not know the language. Um, the example that I always use is, imagine that the CIA had stolen some documents from Germany on nuclear whatever back in World War II, because the Germans were really into that sort of stuff. Would the CIA then take the stolen documents that they had that were in German, technical, highly mathematical, and give that literature to a class of high school German students? The answer is no. The first thing that they would do is want to get people who were physicists, who really understood, as best we could up to that point, nuclear physics. And they would also need to speak German. Okay? So those two things are missing. The Pali language itself was missing from the people who were doing the translations. But the worst was that they didn't know the Dhamma.
Right. Yeah.
That they took all of this from, let us say, the lens of Christianity. That's why there are so many obviously Christian words in the translations of the Pali. The
Like, for
top of
example.
the list, yeah, the top of the list is dukkha, is translated as suffering.
Right. Okay.
Okay, dukkha does not mean suffering at all. What it means is dissatisfaction. Okay, now dissatisfaction can be suffering, and certainly suffering is dissatisfaction, but there's a degree different, because suffering is something that you cannot put up with. You've got to do something about it. Okay, so if you're burned, you've got to bandage the wounds. If you're really sick, you got to go to the hospital, etc., like that. You got to do something about it. With dissatisfaction, we go around. In fact, Henry David Thoreau, in his book on Walden, coined the phrase of living our lives in quiet desperation.
Right.
Okay. Now, what makes desperation noisy is money.
Right.
Right. That if you've got enough money, then you can be noisy in your desperation, and people who don't have money are just quietly desperate, but they don't do anything about it. And it's also true that when people do have a really, really big, heavy duty, let's call it suffering, that may be what we could refer to as dark night of the soul or hitting rock bottom. And it is true then that if somebody does hit rock bottom, then that means that now they're suffering and they've got to do something. This happens often with alcoholics, okay? There is also in the Burmese method that's referred to as Mahasi, though Mahasi himself didn't teach it this way, but the modern Western version of Mahasi um, used the 16 stages of insight, and that after the person begins to see their mind, in other words, once they start sati and begin to see what the mind is doing, but they're not practicing correctly, and so they leave that. What happens is they get a really, really good close look at how badly messed up their mind is without doing anything about it. And that's what leads to then the fearfulness, misery, disgust, despair, and a strong clinging to get out. So that level of despair then is referred to by some people as the dark night of the soul. But a dark night of the soul is actually different than that. That's something I'll give you a little bit about now, and that is the dark night of the soul is when the Christian mystic does not get the response that he expects from his prayer. In other words, and in fact, a good example would be Mother Teresa, who in her memoirs later after she died, her memoirs were posted, and she was saying, what the hell's going on? I talk to Jesus every day, and I see all of these other um, monks and nuns of Christianity talking to God every day, and they talk back, and he talks back to them. But Jesus never talks to me, okay? And where that goes is that Christianity has always taught that you need Jesus. You can't do it on your own. And if Jesus then does not come when he's called, that means that they've got no out. They really are in a dark night of the soul. Okay? So, misery, disgust, and despair over what's going on in your own mind is not really that kind of a dark night of the soul. There's another quality to it, and that is that um, in Christianity, the major old teacher may also be in his dark night of the soul, and he can't help you when you've got your own dark night of the soul, because the only way that both of you are going to come out of your own personal dark nights of the soul is by abandoning Christianity.
Right.
Right? And so it's not quite the same as the dark night of the soul, but there is the knowledge of misery, disgust, despair, and the knowledge that what we're doing now doesn't work.
Yeah.
And only then will they redouble their effort, which means putting in the right effort on the Eightfold Noble Path.
Yeah.
Okay, so in fact, suffering itself does have an element. The point is do we have to go to those depths? The answer is certainly not. That in fact, the better you can see dukkha, a little bit of dukkha, then the better it is to get out of it. Okay, so that's one of the words, but there's many words. In fact, the ones that are most obvious is words like monk and nun, because in Buddhism there are no monks. If you look at what a Christian monk does, he takes vows. Buddhist monks don't take vows. What they do is that they take training precepts. There's a difference, okay? And also, if a monk leaves Christianity, is generally excommunicated, to where the bhikkhus robing and disrobing is almost like a revolving door. That it's quite common for men to become a monk, stop doing that because they've got a family situation. When the family situation is over, they come back and be a monk again. Right? And so there's many, many differences that are not understood well in the West because we're using the whole wrong language for it. We're painting the monks, the bhikkhus as monks and expecting them to behave like monks, okay, devout and that sort of thing, rather than hilarious.
Yeah. And isn't there like a lot of that happens in Buddhism too? The Jesus will save me, but just for the Buddha instead. Like the Buddha is going to save me. Like his supreme awakening is going to, like, is there some of that?
Precisely so. Yes, there is a lot of that because there has been a lot of Hindu influence on Buddhism. Now, how that happens is obviously it happened in the time of the Buddha, that when people came to the Buddha, they came to him with their own belief systems. The question is, can the student drop his belief system, or is he going to carry it with him to prevent him from clearly understanding what the Buddha was teaching? And then if that guy goes off as a teacher, he's going to be spreading the actual Dhamma heavily mixed in with his own bullshit. Century after century after century, and then it's hard to find the original teachings of the Buddha because it's been mixed in with so many beliefs or confirmation biases that so many students over many centuries have brought to it. And I think that that happened big time in the 4th, 5th century AD. About 450 AD is when the Visuddhimagga was written. And that is clearly a Buddhist book, but it's also clearly full of bullshit.
Yeah. So like, would you consider, that's funny. Would you consider bullshit the stuff that kind of gets off track of the Four Noble Truths? Like it doesn't have to do with uh the origin of suffering and the cessation of suffering
I
and
would
like
go so far as to say that anything that anybody makes important,
uh
when people care about things, even though they know nothing about it, they care about it. In other words, most Christians really don't know anything about Jesus. What they know is their own bullshit about Jesus has been given to them by preachers.
right.
Okay, ad infinitum, all the way back in time. Okay, um, and so when we go to read the suttas, now we recognize that there's two issues in there. One is bad translations, and number two, there has been bullshit intentionally added. It was intentionally added. Though there's kind of, actually, I did have more than one conversation directly with Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa on this topic of Buddhaghosa as well as on the topic of Jesus, to where he took different positions than I did, and I came away from it with slightly different positions than he took. But I do notice that. Okay, so with Jesus, the point is that both of us agreed that Jesus had some really profound things to say
Right.
that got messed up and muddied up by Paul, who really changed things around, and then it got stomped really hard by Constantine.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm.
so Christianity is not about Jesus, it's about Paul and Constantine. And the real teachings of Jesus has been more or less lost, ere how noble those teachings are. And a good example in Western situation now is that Christianity is 100% solid racist. Without a doubt, Western, especially American Christianity, evangelical, they all go to the Republican Party in a totally racist, hateful way. They're against gays, they're against blacks, they're against women, they're against abortion. And Jesus, in his noble teaching, says to take care of the poor, to take care of the strangers. Okay. And so that's where Christianity kind of stuff has gone wrong. But they think that the teachings of by being a Christian, you're already saved, and therefore it's okay for you to go around screwing up everybody else's life to make them follow the rules that you don't follow yourself. That's what Christianity has become. So back to the teaching of the Buddha, yes, there is a lot of stuff that's mixed with it. So let's go then to Buddhaghosa, because we started with that, and that is that Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa's position was different. Just like with Jesus, Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa's position was that he could have come up with that wisdom on his own. My position was, no, Buddhism spread to the West, and Jesus learned that he did not invent it on his own. Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa makes the point clearly that the Dhamma is available to anyone who will wake up, that even the Buddha said that it's an old path that he just found, that it was already there in existence. There's many examples of people who come across this wisdom without him. You could go so far as to say, what about Lao Tzu? Because Lao Tzu is full of wisdom, and not only is it full of wisdom, it sounds oh so Buddhist. Much more Buddhist than Jesus.
Right.
So
Definitely.
with Bhikkhu Buddhaghosa, the question is that there is a lot of really strongly wrong information in the Visuddhimagga, but there is also strong evidence of deep research into the Dhamma. So the question is, was Bhikkhu Buddhaghosa a wise fool who was just being selective, or was he intentionally deceptive? My position was that he knew what he was doing, and he was intentionally deceptive. He intentionally misled. And Bhikkhu Buddhaghosa just sees him as a fool.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think he would intentionally do that?
Well, we've got some evidence of that, other writings. And also within the Visuddhimagga, there's places where he will go right through the sutta down to one point, and then it says, therefore, and now what he comes up with is not what's in the sutta. So there's a place where he goes down to the point of a sutta, and then he makes his point rather than continuing to follow with that one particular sutta. So that's the two examples, okay, as well as a whole lot of stuff that's in there that didn't exist in the time of the Buddha. But it's clear that the Visuddhimagga was based in its structure on Sutta number 24 in the Majjhima Nikaya, okay, which is the relay chariot race, where it has 7 steps. And so the Visuddhimagga follows those 7 steps, okay? But in the following of those 7 steps, he makes a mockery of Sila. He doesn't know what it's about. He makes a whole bunch of rules. It gets really Christian, in fact.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the next part, in the Samadhi, he gets really, really magical. It's
Right.
like he takes the teachings of the Buddha and then presses them as far into stupidity as he can take it, overdoing everything.
So what I'm wondering is, like, what's the motive? Is it like because you
Oh,
want to
the
hide
motive is that he was born Brahmin, he stayed Brahmin, he went to Sri Lanka to do this literature, and then he went back to his area, probably in Rajgiri, Varanasi, that neighborhood. And that the rationale for his motivation is that Buddhism in his home area was taking over, and the Brahmins were beginning to starve because they couldn't do cemetery work like having funerals in order to gain great pieces of land. Okay, that the Brahmins only wanted to do the big heavy duty rituals for the wealthy people so that they could take their land. They still do that in Varanasi.
Okay.
That at one time before the Buddha's time, the Brahmins had all of the land because enough people had died that they just kept collecting land, which meant everybody worked for the Brahmins were serfs. So you had Brahmins and serfs. Go ahead.
So that would be greed then, right? So
yes,
you wouldn't consider him a noble because that would be.
I would consider him a villain
Ah,
I would consider him the kind of dude that needs to be dug up just to be hung in effigy again.
okay.
I would consider Buddhaghosa the absolute antithesis of the Buddha.
Okay.
That I don't give him the credit that he's just stupid, that he
Yeah.
just missed the point of the teaching of the Buddha. I think that he really did understand the teaching of the Buddha and hated it because it prevented his family and his people from making a living.
Right. So yeah, it's kind of like if you're ruling over a ton of people, like ignorance is your friend type of thing. So like
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of true in like a lot of different places in history where
Yes, it is.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That in fact, American racism is founded upon that point. That we're white, therefore we're smart, and they are black, therefore they are stupid, and they need to be treated like animals. Okay, that's part of that mentality, and that mentality still exists
I
in
think
every country
yeah.
in every part of the world. Oh, I'm
It,
better than they are because they're different than I am, and I have a right then to harm them intentionally.
I think you had a lot more exposure to racism than I did because I grew up in California, like in, and I'm not very old, so things are kind of different. Like I didn't really encounter like very many racist people except for on the internet. Like I know there's racist people out there, but like I don't like see them on a day to day. At least not outwardly racist in the sense
Hmm.
that you wouldn't be able to survive in California if you were racist. Like you would get fired from your job and everything like that. Um,
Right. There,
yeah,
in some ways, and in some cases, I can see that racism is even more prevalent now than it was in the 1950s. Even though in the 1950s you had separate washrooms, you had separate water fountains. Now nobody's got any water fountains. When's the last time that you saw a water fountain in a department store? You probably don't even know what a water fountain is. There used to be electric cooling machines that would cool water and
I
keep a
still
little
yeah
thing of it, and you
yeah we
could
still
turn
have
the
those.
valve and drink out of it.
Yeah, we still have those.
You
I
still
drink out
have
of them all
those.
the time. They're at the like they're at the gym. They're at the grocery store. Well, actually, during COVID, a lot of them got shut off. But there's still some out there like that work for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah,
In the old South, they were all over the place.
yeah.
There were more bathrooms in the old South than there are today. Why? Because there you had four bathrooms
Uh,
instead of two. Had four bathrooms. So let's get back then to the point about the fact that the suttas are problematic in the form that you will find them. That you have to really dig into the sutras beyond both the bad translations in the words themselves as well as the bad mentality of the people who did the translations. You could go so far as to say then that the original problems with the Visuddhimagga exist now in the translations of the suttas. Is number one, no knowledge of what the data means, and number two, no knowledge of how to put that into a language that people understand. And yet, in one of the sutras, number 139, the Buddha talks about how to teach the Dhamma, and that one of the points that he made is that you've got to teach it in the language that the student understands.
right.
That we can't teach it, so that's why I teach it the way that I do, is because if I stay just within the boundaries of the teachings of the Buddha in the original context, Westerners won't understand. We have to bring in some pretty outrageous modern examples.
Hmm.
Okay, and the example that I was just giving you before was about the difference between dukkha as suffering versus dukkha as just dissatisfaction.
Right.
But
Yeah.
dukkha can be completely suffering,
Yeah.
because some people are really, really slow to wake up. They've got to really, really hurt before they're willing to make a change.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
question is, can you see just enough dukkha in order to see that that's dissatisfying? Let's get ourselves into a state of satisfaction.
Yeah. It almost seems like there's something more profound about like dissatisfaction and experiencing that little, like when it goes away and there's relief. Uh, it's more profound than being like suffering really bad and then getting relief from it, because you see like the roots of it more. Like you see the
Mm-hmm.
root of the problem rather than few, like I'm saved from drowning. So
Right.
like, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Let's use the example then of hot potato. You probably heard. You could also use a hot rock. Okay, but the idea of the hot potato is that once you recognize that it's hot, you want to drop it or give it to someone else. Okay, so the degree of the hotness, can you feel just the warmth of it and say, okay, this is hot, I'll put it down? Or do you have to burn your hand first, holding it, grabbing it, clinging to it until it burns your hand? Okay, so another way of saying it is that if you care for something, but because you care only a little bit, you can see the disadvantage. And so, because of the disadvantage, you can drop your caring. But if you care a lot, if you care a whole lot about something, then it's going to have to burn you really bad
Right.
before you're willing to drop it. And
Yeah.
that burning really bad in order to drop it, that's the dukkha. This is, in fact, what I'm talking about right now. I'm actually teaching Paticca Samuppada.
Yeah.
That clinging that we do gets us into a lot of trouble. So the less clinging we do, the less dissatisfaction we have to put up with. And when we stop caring altogether, no matter what happens, if I don't care, then it's not going to give me dissatisfaction. It's only when I care about something that I don't get my way, I don't get what I want, or I have to put up with something I don't want to put up with. And I care about that. That caring is what makes it, um, let us say, changes it actually from dissatisfaction into actual suffering. That we actually do suffer only because we hang on to that hot potato or hot rock, even as it's burning our flesh. We won't let it go. I need this potato. Okay. So, if we understand it like that, there's a key that can be used, and that key then is Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa. Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa was my key to the suttas and my understanding of the suttas. That, in fact, when I was a student to Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa, when he was alive, I marveled at his knowledge of the suttas, wondering would I ever come up to that level. Then he died.
Mm.
And then 5 years later or so, translations started showing up in English. Um, that there had been the Polytext Society's translations for, gosh, since the 1940s or 1930s or something like that. But the Polytext Society only sold the whole Tripitaka as one great big collection. You either bought all of it for, say, $2,000, or you didn't buy any of it, and so that greatly limited the availability, um, and that in Western Watts, the Watt then will buy a Visuddhimagga, not a Visuddhimagga, a Tripitaka from the Polytext Society, simply because they can get the whole thing so easily. But most of us start off with the Majjhima Nikaya that's done by Bhikkhu Bodhi, the 1995, I think, translation. Maybe it's
Yeah.
1997, something like that was when that book finally came out. Okay, so the first advice that I have to you then is make sure that you understand Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa. And there's a whole number of books that we can talk about there. They're easily found on the internet by just Googling Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa or BIA, which is the Buddhadāsa Itapanyo Archives. And so there's a number of books that are in Spanish, Chinese, some in French, but the vast majority of them are translated into English. And what we're talking about here is translations of his Thai. He spoke in Thai mostly. He spoke a little bit of English, but then that Thai. And so, in fact, I think you do know that there's recently been a new book published called The Eye of the Dhamma. You and I have
Yeah,
talked about that.
talked about
Okay,
that.
so that's a good place to start. Another good place to start is the ABCs of Buddhism.
Yeah, but I was hoping you'd give me some suttas because I kind of want to just go into the canon. I know
Okay.
I want to read it for myself. I don't
Yes.
want
Okay.
filter, you know?
So
Like that's why I
there
talked to
are. Okay, so let's go in that direction, but I do want to make the point that the best place to understand the suttas. I assumed you dropped your phone.
Yeah, I dropped my phone. 1 second here.
Yeah.
Uh,
All right. I do appreciate what you're saying, but I want to make sure, just in general for people, that the best way to understand the suttas is by understanding the teachings of Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa. That way we don't get confused when we read it, because if we read it in the sutta and we're confused by it, then we have a backup source of what Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa taught.
okay, there it goes. Sorry.
Okay, there it goes. All right. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, that we do have an assistant, we do have a back door into the suttas,
Okay.
because a lot of the stuff that Bhikkhu Buddha taught, he taught through the suttas. That he'd actually done his own translations, and the translations that Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa had have become quite common in Thai language.
Oh, really?
Now I think there's actually 4 different translations of the entire Tripitaka, or 3 translations plus an incomplete one, the one that Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa had done. So
Wow.
the Thai people have ready access, but he was proving that some of the translations that had been done previously were not correct.
Hmm.
That there was a lot of research done because of him. So some of the statements that he made really made him start to look and think and work hard to figure out, and he was always right. Okay, one of the statements that was made is that the Buddha only taught one form of meditation. He only taught one, and he taught that in conjunction with the Eightfold Noble Path. And that
Right.
one kind of meditation they taught was anapanasati, and there is in fact an anapanasati sutta. So that's the first
Yeah.
one that you want to write down, the anapanasati sutta, which is
Yeah,
number
I read. And
118.
yeah.
Okay, and that it fits in directly and closely with the second one, which would be the Great 40, which was number 117 in the Majjhima Nikaya. Those 2 suttas need to be read together.
Okay.
Okay. There is a third sutta that actually does come third, not first. That is the Satipatthana Sutta, which is number 10 in the Majjhima Nikaya.
Right.
Burmese go for the Satipatthana, and because of that, they almost forget about the Eightfold Noble Path, which means they actually forget about the entire teachings of the Buddha. Okay, so we don't put the Satipatthana first, we put it where it belongs. When we know that there's only one kind of meditation, then in the Satipatthana Sutta, we can see that all of the meditations that are listed as meditations were the failures that Buddha did in his training of students. That in the very beginning, he would send them to the charnel ground. Go look at some corpses. Get a big load of what's going to be happening to you very soon. Okay. And that in fact, part of the robe is designed around the wrapping cloth uh, that was done for the bodies.
Oh, that
Wrap
reminds
a
me.
cloth shroud. Okay, it comes in thin strips of about 4 inches wide and are long pieces, and so the monks would take those shrouds as an individual part of the robe that they were making. So the Buddha did not teach the charnel ground meditations. He stopped doing that, but he continued to teach anapanasati. Also, the Buddha did not teach, for instance, metta meditation, but that was something that was practiced by people before the time of the Buddha, and many students who came to the Buddha to become monks still practice metta kind of meditation, and the Buddha taught them the Anapanasati Sutta. He said there are those who are practicing metta, karuna. There are those who are practicing mudita and upekkha. But anapanasati, well practiced, has great benefits. So he's actually saying, in a way, that their practice of metta is not of great benefit, but anapanasati is of great benefit.
Yeah. So like I got so I think I learned the Dhamma in a more traditional way in the sense that I learned how to practice by you telling me how to practice. So how to gladden the mind and uh, cultivate, like uh, collect on the wholesome and purify
Mhm.
the mind and breathe and uh, enjoy the breath and start to enjoy life and make a habit out of enjoying life and make a habit
Mhm.
out of satisfaction. And I found this practice to be sufficient. So
Of great fruit, great benefit.
of great benefit. And because of that, uh, I find like that made me more interested in the suttas rather
Mhm.
than the other way around. So like
Mhm.
I I think reading the suttas is like from that perspective of correct practice is a much more enjoyable experience, and also it gives me like if I want to like try to sound more official or like more legitimate, it's like citing your source almost. So it's cool to have
Mhm.
like a sutta to like back up a point you're trying to make about suffer or about dissatisfaction.
You know that from me. I do that on a regular basis, okay?
Yeah,
That I've got backup. When people even talk to me about what is my teaching or my method, I keep telling them, I don't have one.
yeah.
I don't have one. What I've got is the sutras, and that goes through the lineage from Bhikkhu Buddhadāsa back to Buddhaghosa, back to Vichai, all the way back to the Buddha. Okay, the lineage is there. And that's why lineage is so important. And Westerners don't have much of anything about lineage. They don't know anything about lineage, which is twofold. One is the information about how to practice and the practice of it, and then the second part is the inspiration. You've got to be around a noble monk to know what nobility is. Otherwise, it's just an idea in people's minds. Okay, so the word arahat is meaningless except for what the student makes up,
Right.
right? But when you're around them and you understand what kind of lifestyle that they live, and you see the joy that they have, and the enthusiasm that they have, and also the deep knowledge that they have of the Dhamma, that's what's inspirational. That's actually the biggest job. My job is to inspire students to practice because many of them already have a lot of knowledge about it. The knowledge is spotty. In fact, the one that you mentioned was the gladdening of the mind or the changing the mind from unwholesome. That's what the Mahasi and the Vajrayana and the Zen are all missing.
Oh yeah, I was kind of uh, on the path, if we want to talk about it that way, in the sense of the spiritual quest or the spiritual journey before I came to the Dhamma or
Hmm.
to the teachings of the Buddha, practicing Advaita. So doing, oh, like just accepting it, like this is already perfect. And it's like, if you don't understand that you're talking yourself into suffering, or you don't understand that you're talking yourself into feeling bad,
Mm-hmm.
then, and you think that's just the way it is, like it's gonna keep on being more of the same. So
Mm-hmm.
there is that, like, the right effort. There's no way to uh come out of your own delusions and stuff like that unless you actually practice doing that. But yeah.
Okay. There is a kind of a built-in catch-22 in the sense that it's a two-step process, and the two-step process is one, getting the mind fit for work. And then the second is doing the work. So you could actually see that the Anapanasati Sutta is broken into those two groups with the body, the feelings, and the mind is getting the mind fit for work. And then the Dhammanupassana, the end of it, is actually what we need to look at or understand with a mind that's fit for understanding. Otherwise, the mind's going to be full of confirmation bias. And so
Yeah.
we have to actually gladden the mind, brighten it up, getting it in fit for work. An example of that is the first grader who is learning their numbers, or maybe the second grader who is learning arithmetic. If she is really interested and really curious about it and make it fun, then that child will learn arithmetic much better than if they hate it. They don't know what it is, and it's frustrating to them. So, the second grade teacher, her job is to inspire her kids to really like arithmetic. And if she's successful, she's going to have people who understand logic and then can understand the teaching of the Buddha. But if the kids don't like arithmetic, and many of them don't, and the reason they don't like it is because they were told to do it. Sit down and do your homework, learn your ABCs, and that's almost a guarantee that they're not going to like learning to read. It's because they don't like it, and they're told to do it. But if the teacher can make, by reading stories to the students and making it a lot of fun, then the students will want to have that fun on their own, and then they're curious and interested. So that curiosity, that interest, is actually a major part of the path that the Buddha lays out. That in fact, when someone becomes completely curious, interested, they've got the Dhamma on their mind all the time, and they're enthusiastic and eager for the Dhamma, which is completely different than being devoted to the Dhamma. Devotion means that you've got some authority that you're sucking up to. Eager means that you've got it right here in your hands, you're about to get it. So the difference between devotion and eagerness. And so the Buddha talks about eagerness, about enthusiasm. And on top of that is complete delight. To become completely delighted with the Dhamma is like now the spark has gone into the kindling, and then the delight is when the bonfire is roaring. Okay? These are the stages of Sotapanna. First, we get really interested with the idea that I can do this. Then we begin to get beyond a shadow of a doubt. I know that this is correct. Then we begin to practice in a way of being really nurturing to ourselves in the sense that we're really to see the wrongdoing because we want out of it. And as we are then making, that's a major hurdle because most of us are told, oh, you're not supposed to make mistakes. Therefore, if you do make a mistake, you're a bad person.
Yeah.
But with the Dhamma eye,
Yeah.
using that word again, that term again, with the Dhamma eye, you can see, oh, I want to see the dukkha easily so I can avoid it
Right.
easily.
Right.
Right? I do want to see my wrongdoing so I can set it
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. That's a big
Okay?
difference.
That's a big difference is when
Yeah.
we're willing to nurture our own bad behavior. rather than criticizing ourselves for our bad behavior because it doesn't meet up to the rules.
Yeah.
Okay.
There,
So
there,
I've actually mentioned all 7 of them there, and they are in a sutta number 48.
is it Majjhima Nikaya?
Yes, number 48 in the Majjhima Nikaya. If I go for a sutta that's outside the Majjhima Nikaya, I'll make a point of it.
Okay, got it.
Okay. But the Majjhima Nikaya was put together within the first year after the Buddha's death. It had a lot to do with Ananda, but there's a lot of suttas in there that was the accumulation of what the Buddha's life was like that was compiled after he died, as opposed to the Dhamma Nikaya, which was done in the time of Ashoka, about 150 to 200 years after the time of the Buddha. And that document was written in order to entice Brahmins out of their Brahmanism into Buddhism.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of magical stuff in the Dhamma Nikaya, but there's quite a lot of magical stuff in the Majjhima Nikaya also, in the following way. As the students come to the Buddha, believing, clinging to, caring about all the teachings that they've had before, and so the Buddha has to kind of join them in that to pace them with it. And then he can lead them out of those beliefs. One of the big dangers then with Western Buddhism and the translations that it has is many people will go around saying, oh, the Buddha agrees with these people. He's even talking to them in their own language. That means that the Buddha must believe this stuff himself.
Yeah.
Where that's not the case. And in fact, the Kosambian Sutta, or no, the Kosambian is 48. The Kusala Sutta, which is actually number 65 and 66 in the threes of the Anguttara Nikaya. And people will read that and completely miss the point because of one 2-letter word. The word if. If that stuff exists and you practice correctly and have a good heart, then after you're reborn, you will be reborn in a good place. But then the next paragraph or the next sentence is, but if there is no rebirth, no reincarnation, still you get the benefits of correct practice in this very life.
Right.
Okay, so people will take that and think that all that means that the Buddha is teaching rebirth. No, the Buddha is not teaching rebirth. He only taught one thing, and that is dukkha nirodha, right here, right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's another sutta to look at, and that's Anguttara number 3, sutta number 65 and 66. Okay, so there's a lot of that in there. There is a sutta number 20, and sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, where a lot of rebirthers go to prove rebirth is correct. And they do that in English language because of the bad translations, because the translators themselves understood it in a certain way. But the very last part of that sutta turns the whole thing upside down logically by saying the Buddha having the words, therefore do not get reborn. Okay, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't get reborn. Well, most of the teachings about rebirth and reincarnation is you've got no choice in it.
Right.
But the Buddha's making the point is, yes, you do have a choice. Right now, don't get reborn. Don't go into your dukkha. Don't go into suffering. Right now. And so this is the problem with Western translations is that the translators didn't really understand the teaching of the Buddha as only teaching one thing, dukkha nirodha. So the step 2, the 2-step operation is, one, we've got to get the mind cleaned out in order to see clearly. The problem, though, or the catch-22 is is that if people are still clinging to things, then they won't practice correctly. If people believe in rebirth and reincarnation, one of the answers is that, therefore, I can go ahead and suffer a little bit now, and in my next life, I'll have a better chance to practice. And that's where most Asians are. But the whole point of those kinds of teachings is that you are not in control of your own life, that you are subject to some karma machine, that every action you take is either good or bad, and that mounts up. And then the karma machine is going to, after you're dead for 300 years, is going to dig you up just to kick your ass.
Right.
That's the kind of rebirth belief that people have, which means then that they don't get the spark. They can't see the dukkha, and they're willing to put up with a little bit of dukkha and not practice.
Right.
That's
So
why it's possible then for people to go into real suffering, and then they'll start to practice correctly. But this little bit of dukkha is okay. I'll put up with it. I'll keep working my job. I'll keep living with a woman who hates my guts. I'll still continue to do what I'm told to do and get along because I can tolerate it, right? Because next time, because I'm giving to the church, next time I'll have a better opportunity to practice. I won't have to work so hard. I won't have a devil of a wife, etc., like that. Okay, so this is the reason why so few people practice correctly, is because they are caring about the future and not recognizing that you don't have any future. All you've got is right now. It's been a long right now, but that's all you've got.
yeah, so it's kind of like a superstition,
It's superstition, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a clear example of that. If you're a superstitious and you think that house down the street is a haunted house, then you're not going to be readily going into that house and expecting to find out actually what's there, because of your fear is going to keep you out of investigating what's really there. There may be, a basement that's full of gold, and you're not going to
Yeah.
find it because you're afraid that that house is haunted.
And you might
Superstition.
talk yourself into hearing things. You might be, oh, I hurt you, confirmation bias. Now you really believe in that house is haunted because that's how
Mm-hmm.
you.
Because
So
everybody hears that the house is haunted. Everybody in the neighborhood believes the house is haunted. And so when they hear the wind blow through the trees,
yeah,
they hear the howling and they think that it's the spooks that live in the house.
yeah,
When in fact, all they're hearing is just the wind.
yeah, right,
And that's really strongly built into our culture. Superstition would be the primary training tool that we give our kids. If you don't do what you're told, you're going to get your ass whooped.
yeah. Or Santa Claus. If you're not a good boy, you're gonna get coal.
Uh-huh. Okay. So that's the problem. We have to put down our superstitions so that we can actually practice seeing what's there clearly. And by doing that over and over again, gladdening the mind, brightening the mind, looking at what's going on, checking it out, and getting ourselves into that really, really comfortable, stable place where the body is uh, at rest, the
Tranquil.
feelings are at rest, the mind is at rest. Only then can you see clearly. I often use the example of a camera. You've seen many, many places. One of them that's kind of funny is that an avalanche is rolling right down the hill, and the person is so interested in getting a video recording of that avalanche that by the time they finally wake up, that the avalanche is coming right here, and it's
Yeah,
going to be here really, really soon, and
yeah,
then they drop the camera
yeah,
because they're running, or they hold the camera in their hand, but they start running. Now, while that camera is moving, we can't see the avalanche anymore
yeah,
because the guy has stopped because of his fear. The camera's gotten really shaky because his whole stability is shaky now. No more stability.
yeah,
Okay, so if we believe in avalanches, then we're going to be constantly running from avalanches and we can't see them clearly.
Avalanches of dukkha.
The avalanche of dukkha, whatever's rolling down the hill at you. You got to know it well enough to be able to check it, find out where it's going so that you can get out of its way.
Right. So would you say the noble understanding of karma is that we experience the immediate result of, for instance, our thinking? Like if we're like thinking angry thoughts, we're going to feel immediate
Angry feelings. We're going to feel dissatisfied. Right.
And
then the body is in an unsatisfactory state.
Body's tense. Yeah.
Right. The body is all tensed up.
Yeah.
Our neck is tight. We may get ourselves they talk about being flushed with blood and all of that, because the blood is there in anger and fear is in a fight or flight mode.
Yeah.
Okay. Anger is the fighting and the fear is the flight. And we always have a choice. And in our society, we generally are trained, superstitiously trained, that it's better to fight than to run. Right? But both of them have a quality of the body is now all set up for fight or flight. It's not set up for wise examination. So we have to come to a place where we are free from fear and anger. We have to get ourselves into a safe, comfortable, secure environment so that we become satisfied with what is, and then we can expect what is directly rather than having our confirmation bias pollute our understanding. Okay, so in the next sutta that I'll mention is the āsava Sutta, number 2 in the Majjhima Nikaya. The āsava means all of the taints. Now, the word āsava and the word kilesa are interrelated. But in fact, right there in that sutta, it starts talking about āsava. It continues to talk about āsava, but they're actually talking about kilesa. Now, the distinction between kilesa in the Pali and āsava is that the kilesa is actually like a rope or a bondage, like your hands are tied. Okay. The word āsava means canker, outflow, pus pocket, blackhead, those kind of things, perhaps a cyst.
Okay.
Okay. But you can see that they have the similar quality to them.
So one is your hands are tied.
Right. And you're tied up. You're bound up.
Okay. And what
the other one is, and the other one is more of a canker or a pus pocket or a boil or something like that. That's what the word āsava means. It means an outflow.
What connects those two things? How are they similar?
What connects those two things is that we're using human language of things that do exist to point to things that cannot be properly described. Just like the Tao, the Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao. That we can only use language to point to things. We can't really directly say it because there's no language for it.
Okay. I think I get it. Yeah.
Okay. And here's an example of how that works. Whenever we are trying to talk with our friends about how we feel, we always use superlatives.
Right.
To prove how bad we feel, where in fact we may feel just a tiny little bit bad, but we use great big language.
Yeah.
We'll use expletives. So
and
instead of saying the bank ripped me off, we have to say that goddamn bank ripped me off, Okay. Right? But It's not a really big deal until we try to express it. And then we have to express it in great big ways. Okay, so that's the problem that cankers and āsava are great big things that's pointing to little things that are in the mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I find funny is that when we use the expletive, sometimes when we're really happy, sometimes we say hell yeah.
Uh-huh.
I think that's kind of funny because it's kind of oxymoronic, but
I
anyways,
know, I know.
point.
Uh, we also use the word like get the hell out of Dodge or get the hell out of here.
Yeah,
And the funny part about it is that the hell is in the mind.
yeah,
Getting the hell out of Dodge means I'm taking my hell out of Dodge.
yeah,
The hell in my own mind when I get out of Dodge. Okay,
yeah,
the hell out. All right. So within this context of the name of the sutta is the Sabha Asava Sutta, and yet the first canker to be gotten rid of is knowledge. The Buddha was big on the distinction between knowledge and deliverance, or knowledge and freedom. An example of that is that the guy can only break out of the prison if he knows how to break out of the prison. And there's been sometimes some really spectacular escapes. Prison. One of the Mexican cartels was able to escape from prison 3 times.
what was his name? El Chapo.
Uh, uh,
Yeah, it was
yeah,
that
I
big
forget.
drug leader. Yeah,
Yes. So anyway, that's the whole thing. Is the knowledge comes first, and then the deliverance. So it's actually then in this state is that we have to get stability so that we can see clearly and gain the knowledge so that we can figure out what to do to get out of this.
hmm.
Okay. And that the way that this is normally understood then is that stability is the first jhana. And
Yeah,
in the first jhana, then you can inspect what needs to be inspected. And when we are inspecting some things, that actually then becomes the definition of those higher jhanas. For instance, when you're really inspecting
yeah,
sukha, then by inspecting sukha in a stable way, that's the third jhana is to be able to really see how nice and comfortable and easy we feel. To where the second jhana is the piti, which means we're actually now paying close attention to how good we feel, how marvelous this is. But that great big yeehaw melts then into just easy satisfaction.
yeah. So it's kind of like a platter of different like food items. You could say that first jhana is like the platter, and it has the PT and the sukha, and you can take the sukha and like take a bite out of it and really
Mm-hmm.
taste what sukha is like, and like sort you by investigating the taste of it, like you experience it, you experience it more prominently in your experience than the
Precisely
other
so.
thing, even though it's all on the platter.
Uh-huh. Okay. So going back then to the Sabha Asava Sutta, the first part of the sutta, let us say uh, in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, he's got verse numbers that are not normally in the Pali. And so just for reference, it's verse number 11 is the key. But the first 10 are about what is unwise attention and what is wise attention. And unwise attention is such that when we have unwise attention, then uh, superstitions and belief systems get built up. We're paying attention to the wrong thing, okay? And that in fact, many of the people who start with Buddhism are paying attention to the wrong thing, which is specifically stated here in the sutta, in the sense of, I've got to figure out who I am, right? The Buddha talks about that as unwise attention. Who was I in the past? Having past memories of the things that I have done. And then what will I be in the future? how do I get from where I am now into the future? And what is it that's me right now? The Buddha refers to all of this as unwise attention, and it gives rise to beliefs that he calls a thicket of views.
Mm.
Okay, so unwise attention is attention such that you do not gain anything from it, but in fact, you kind of hurt yourself. And so trying to figure out what I am is also, or what I was or what I will be, that's actually the belief in rebirth and reincarnation. So it's unwise attention. So long as people are paying unwise attention, they're not going to make any progress with anapanasati because they're missing the point. Okay. And then it comes to verse 11 where it says, and what is wise attention? And then quoting, it says, this is dukkha. This is the cause of dukkha. This is what the end of dukkha is like. And this is the path that takes us there. In other words, wise attention is to pay attention to the Eightfold Noble Path and the Four Noble Truths. That's wise attention. And then the sutta says in the next sentence, stop. Wise then attention leads to three fetters broken. Okay, so the āsava, the cankers, is the unwise attention. Once we bring wise attention and wise focus to the Eightfold Noble Path, the Four Noble Truths, really experience what it's like to be at peace, at stillness, etc. That part then leads to the removal of the first three fetters. What are the first three fetters? The first one, go ahead, you know them.
Personality view.
Personality view. Who am I? So
Right.
long as you're trying to figure out who am I, you'll miss the point. The point is dukkha, dukkha nirodha. Once you get
Right.
into the dukkha nirodha, now you can recognize what I was or what I thought I was. I recognize now I'm merely a moving target, that who I am cannot be defined. There's no way to define it. And yet many people get really hung up on trying to figure out who they are, what they will be, either in the next particular short time future or in the long future, or what was I deep in the past, and how does that deep past affect who I am now?
Yeah.
Right? And all of that is unwise attention. Me, 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 me. But when we break that fetter, that means now that we have the ability to see clearly that I am not whatever it was that I thought I was. Whatever it was that I thought I was, I'm not that. I'm not sure of what I am because I am a moving target. And so I'm not any of those things. This is what we mean then by anatta, that things are changing. The second fetter is the fetter of sila bhatta paramasa, are all of the rites, rules, rituals, shoulds, the rules, the standards that we carry that keep creating the self. In the sense of, oh, you should go on a diet. Then me goes on the diet and fails at the diet. And so the rules are you should be successful on the diet and you're a failure. All right. So there's where we are. I'm on a diet, number one. And number two, I'm a failure at the diet. That's all selfishness. So, in fact, the self is created by the standards that we keep. So we have to break the standards, start lowering the bar so that we become successful more often. Start nurturing and stop having such a high bar, the standard that we've got to make.
Yeah, just lower the bar.
Yeah, just lower the bar. Stop having a bar, in fact. Yeah, just accept yourself as who you are. You're okay. All the parts, all the warts, all of the cankers, everything is okay because calling them warts and parts and cankers is a set of rules that we have been gathering up and from our childhood. So the third fetter then that's broken is the doubt
Right.
about who I am. We're no longer concerned with who I am, but we're also got something else, and that is by understanding the Eightfold Noble Path and its relationship to dukkha and dukkha nirodha and Four Noble Truths. By understanding that, completely understanding that, then all the doubt about what is and is not the path. We know the path. We've got it. There's no more doubt about it. And when these three things come together, that's actually step 3 in the 7-step point of Sutta number 48. So you can see that number 2 and number 48 and also number 24 bind directly together only for the one who already has their mind fit for work. And when the mind is fit for work, that means that we're paying wise attention to this is dukkha, this is the cause of dukkha, this is the end of dukkha, and this is the path that leads to the end of dukkha. And that's what then brings us to that point of, without a doubt, I know what I can do now to come out of suffering. I've got it wired now. Okay? That's beyond a shadow of a doubt that I know what is the path and what is not the path. That's a major point in one's life, when we know which direction that we've got to go in, that there's no more doubts in our mind about what to do. And what is it that we got to do? Is we got to look. We got to see clearly, and we keep doing that. Okay, so now in kind of a retrospect, we have covered now some of the most important suttas there. Number 118, number 117, number 10, number 24, number 48, and number 2. That's 6 suttas. Those 6 suttas together will give you all of the liberation that you need. Everything else is candy. Actually, a lot of the suttas in there are trying to get people out of their superstitions into their, let us say, enthusiasm for practice. But the real wisdom is understanding completely the Eightfold Noble Path,
Right.
and how to practice correctly, so that then we can get rid of the higher fetters, the fetter of ill will and anger, and then the fetter of greed. The Sotapan still has anger. He still has frustrations, but he knows when they're there. He can
Right.
see them. And as he sees them, he can put them down. So we then develop the habit of not having any desire. We have the habit of not having, in other words, we stop caring about things. And when you don't give a flying flip anymore, that's all you need, is just stop caring about stuff.
Yeah.
And just enjoy. Hey, things are good enough right now. No place to go and nothing to do.
Yeah.
Okay? So go for that list. We've given a list of 6. There's certainly some others, but number 2, number 24, and number 48 is with wisdom.
I
Sutta
got
number 117 and 118 is how to get the stability so that we can see clearly.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, that was beautiful. That was great. That was good to listen to. It was a good refresher, like
Yes.
some of these things, like it's it doesn't really get old. Like I learned it and I see it and I enjoy it and I delight in it, and just hearing it again is like, it's still entertaining.
It is. It's great. It's the best entertainment I know of.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's actually step 5 of the 7 steps in Sutta number 48. And that is the example of it is a cow who, once she has a calf, even though she eats her grass and lives her life, she's got one eye on that calf all the time. She really cares about that calf and she's keeping an eye on it. Okay? That's
Right.
how we want to look at the Dhamma. Is
Yeah.
we can go about doing anything through our life, but we've got our mind, we've got our eye on the Dhamma. How is this Dhamma or what? You know,
Yeah.
everything is Dhamma.
That's the sati. That's like the unremitting sati, right?
Unremitting sati is to keep
Yeah.
looking at the fact that this is Dhamma too. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I've got another call coming in, so let's finish this one.
All right. Thank you so much. Good seeing you.
Okay.
All
Good
right.
to see you again.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Scott.